They swore to uphold the law, but they became the lawbreakers.
Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years.
From planning evidence to brutal beatings, these officers crossed the line. Today, we expose the dirty cops who tarnished their uniforms and shattered public trust. Were they simply rogue wolves, or is there a deeper rot within the system? Stay tuned to find out how they were caught and what justice finally looked like. Omar Nazar. In the sweltering streets of Nasiriyah, where the Tigris River flows like a lifeblood, a city's cry for justice echoed through the bullets and tear gas as a rogue police commander's reign of terror was finally brought to an end. In 2019, a generation of young Iraqis, frustrated and disillusioned by the broken promises of their leaders, took to the streets to demand a better future. They protested against the cancer of corruption, the scourge of unemployment, and the stark lack of basic services in a country blessed with oil wealth, yet ravaged by decades of war and conflict that had left its infrastructure in ruins. But the authorities responded with force, crushing the protests in a bloody crackdown that left over 600 people dead nationwide. At the forefront of this deadly response was Commander Omar Nazar, a man once sworn to protect and serve, who had unleashed a deadly crackdown on protesters, leaving a trail of blood and broken dreams in his wake. The deadliest incident occurred on November 28, 2019, when security forces, led by Commander Nazar, violently broke up a sit-in at a Nasiriyah bridge. That day, Nazar's squad killed 21 people, including Mustafa Ahmad, and injured many others, including Mohammed Yasser Hussein. However, the tables turned on Nazar's in February 2022, when his luck ran out and he faced the consequences of his actions. He stood trial for the senseless murder of 21 innocent people, and the courtroom was electric with emotion. The courtroom was packed with around 95 families who had filed complaints against Nazar, and over 100 witnesses testified against him, recounting the horrors they had endured. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with undiluted suspense, as families of the victims and survivors of the brutal crackdown packed the benches, their eyes blazing with a mix of grief, anger, and determination. Every single one of them had been personally affected by Commander Nazar's actions, and they had all come to see justice served, their eyes fixed on him with piercing intensity, their unyielding gazes conveying the depth of their pain and suffering. It was as if they were silently compelling him to confront the anguish he had caused, to take responsibility for the harm he had inflicted, and to face the reckoning for his brutal deeds. As the verdict was read out, a collective sigh of relief echoed through the hall. Nazar was sentenced to life in prison. The court's verdict was unequivocal. Nazar was guilty of murdering Mustafa Ahmad and his group, as well as inflicting injuries on Mohammed Yasser Hussein and his group. This sentence represents a rare instance of accountability for the security forces, who have faced long-standing accusations of using excessive force against protesters. Lewis Edwards. In the dark corners of the internet, a predator masquerades as a friend, targeting vulnerable children and leaving a path of destruction that would eventually lead to his exposure and downfall. This wolf in sheep's clothing, a 24-year-old former officer named Lewis Edwards, used his online disguise to gain the trust of his young victims, only to exploit and harm them in the most devastating ways. Posing as a teenage boy on Snapchat, Lewis would build trust with his victims, gaining their confidence before coercing them into sharing explicit images and videos. He would threaten and blackmail them into compliance, even when they begged him to stop and threatened to report him to the authorities. This was a man who had sworn to protect and serve, but instead used his power to prey on the vulnerable. Lewis' twisted behavior went even further. He browsed the dark web for indecent images of kids, and had a guide on how to blackmail people on his secret devices. This guy knew the law, but used that knowledge to commit even more crimes. The police started investigating Lewis when they found out about his illegal activities on the dark web. On February 8, 2023, they arrested him and seized his heavily encrypted devices. As they dug deeper, they discovered a trail of abuse that went on for 4 years, with Edwards exploiting 207 girls. Despite confessing to 1 in 60 crimes, Lewis thought he could still outsmart the law. but his attempts to hide behind secrecy and evade justice were ultimately in vain. He refused to give up his passwords and even skipped his own sentencing hearing. But the truth was finally revealed in a dramatic 3-day trial at Cardiff Crown Court. The judge, Lloyd Clark, called him out for his cruel and sadistic behavior, saying he had caused immense harm to his victims and their families. She made it clear that the victims were not to blame. They had done nothing wrong, and they bore no responsibility for Edward's actions. What's even more disturbing is that Lewis was a serving police officer at the time, which only adds to the severity of his crimes. His actions damaged the reputation of South Wales Police and police in general, making it even harder for victims to trust those who are meant to protect them. Lewis pleaded guilty to 162 offenses in May and September, and was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2023. The prosecutor, Lucy Dowdall, praised the victims for their bravery and emphasized that Edward's position as a police officer did not make him above the law. She also highlighted the importance of vigilance and action in preventing child sexual abuse, and encouraged others to come forward if they had been affected by the likes of Edward's crimes. Wayne Couzens. On February 28, 2021, Wayne Couzens, a police officer, rented a white Vauxhall car from a company in Dover. 5 days later, he finished a 12-hour shift at the United States Embassy in London and headed to Kent to pick up the rental car. He then drove back to London, making a few stops along the way before arriving in Clapham around 9:23 p.m. Meanwhile, Sarah Everard had left her friend's house in Clapham Junction around 9 p.m., walking across Clapham Common to head home to Brixton Hill. She chatted with her boyfriend on the phone for about 15 minutes and made plans to meet up the next day. As she walked, she was captured on doorbell camera footage and a passing police car's dash cam. That's when Couzens struck. He pulled over in his rental car, flashed his police badge, and handcuffed Sarah, likely claiming she was being arrested for breaking COVID rules. They were caught on a bus surveillance camera twice, and then Couzens drove them to Kent. He later switched to his personal car and took Sarah to a remote area, where he took advantage of and strangled her using his police belt. After the horrific crime, Couzens drove to a petrol station, bought some drinks, and then headed to his plot of land in Hodes Wood, where he disposed of Sarah's phone. He returned the rental car and drove to Sandwich, where he got rid of her phone in a watercourse. It wasn't until later that day, when Sarah's boyfriend reported her missing, that the police started investigating. Little did they know, the killer was one of their own. In the days following Sarah Everard's murder, her killer, Couzens, was acting suspiciously. He told his colleagues he was stressed and didn't want to carry a gun anymore. But little did they know, he was already hiding a dark secret. On March 5th, Couzens bought a petrol container and filled it up, then headed to Hodes Wood, where he had previously burned Sarah's body in a refrigerator. He returned to the area on March 7, this time with 2 large builder's bags, which he used to dispose of Sarah's remains in a pond. Meanwhile, the police were closing in on him. They found human remains in a builder's bag in Hodes Wood, and soon discovered that Couzens had been using his police belt and handcuffs to commit the crime. As the investigation unfolded, Couzens' story began to unravel. He claimed he was having financial problems and was being threatened by a gang of Eastern Europeans, but it was all just a cover for his heinous crime. On March 12, 2021, Couzens was charged with kidnapping and murder, and he eventually pleaded guilty to the crimes. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole, a rare and severe punishment. But the story doesn't end there. Couzens' colleagues, PC Jonathan Cobbin and former PC Joel Borders, were also found to have been sending grossly offensive messages in a WhatsApp group chat with Couzens. They were jailed for their crimes, and the incident raised questions about the culture within the police force. As for Couzens, he's currently serving his sentence at HM Prison Frankland in County Durham, and despite his heinous crimes, he may still be entitled to a police pension worth £7,000 a year. Daniel Holtzclaw. You might want to classify him as a Trojan horse, disguised as a guardian of the law, hiding a dark secret within. Daniel Holtzclaw, a former Oklahoma City police officer, was accused of a heinous crime spree that targeted multiple African American women between December 2013 and June 2014. His modus operandi was to prey on women from a poorer, majorly black area of the city, using background checks to identify victims with outstanding warrants or criminal records. The incident that finally led to Holtzclaw's arrest went down around 2 a.m. on June 18, 2014. He had already finished his shift on the northeast side of Oklahoma City and was cruising to his place in his police ride. But instead of heading home, Holtzclaw made a suspicious and unauthorized traffic stop, one that he didn't bother to report to dispatch or log on his patrol car computer. The driver he targeted was Jani Ligons, a 57-year-old woman who was simply driving through the area that Holtzclaw had been terrorizing. Unlike his other victims, she wasn't struggling financially and didn't have a record. Ligons said Holtzclaw made her lift her shirt and pull down her pants before forcefully taking advantage of her. She begged him to stop and was straight up terrified for her life. But she didn't let fear silence her. She filed a police report and spoke out against him. As detectives delved deeper into Jani Ligons's case, they dug through dusty police records and discovered a previously overlooked report from May 2014. The report detailed an incident in which a woman was detained, taken to a remote location, and subjected to sexual coercion by a law enforcement officer. Though her cry for help had gone unanswered at the time, the detectives reached out to her again, and she bravely relived the trauma, guiding them through the route the officer had taken that fateful night. The route matched the GPS trail of Holtzclaw's patrol car, a haunting coincidence that led them to suspect a serial predator in their midst. The detectives then scoured Holtzclaw's digital footprint, tracing his history of running names through police databases, searching for patterns of abuse. They found multiple women who had been targeted repeatedly, and 6 courageous souls agreed to testify against their tormentor. The GPS device on Holtzclaw's car placed him at the scene of each alleged incident, and police records revealed a sinister pattern of warrant checks on each of the victims. The investigation spanned 6 months, starting with the first brave woman who came forward, a woman Holtzclaw had arrested for drug possession in December 2013, and then subjected to a heinous act of sexual activity while she was handcuffed to a hospital bed. Detectives Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory were tasked with questioning Holtzclaw, who denied all accusations. But they saw through his facade, and further investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of abuse. Holtzclaw's use of police databases to target vulnerable women was uncovered, and a dozen more victims came forward, sharing their harrowing experiences. As the evidence mounted, Holtzclaw was arrested on August 21, 2014, and charged with 36 counts of sexual abuse, including rape and sexual battery. The final jury consisted of 8 men and 4 women, all white. 3 black men were initially selected but later rejected, sparking disappointment from the Oklahoma City NAACP chapter. Holtzclaw, who was on paid leave until August 2014, was fired in January 2015, and his trial began on November 2, 2015. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. Prosecutors presented DNA evidence found on Holtzclaw's uniform trousers, matching one of the victims, a 17-year-old at the time. Holtzclaw's defense claimed that the transfer of DNA occurred as a result of searching the victim's purse, rather than through direct contact with the victim. During the trial, Holtzclaw acknowledged encountering the women but maintained his innocence. The defense focused on the accuser's lifestyles, calling only one witness, a former girlfriend who testified Holtzclaw never exhibited inappropriate behavior around her. On December 10, 2015, Holtzclaw was convicted on 18 charges, with the jury recommending 263 years in prison. His attorney requested a new trial on January 20, 2016, citing withheld evidence, but was immediately denied. The Oklahoma City Police Chief, Bill City, said they were happy with the jury's call and felt justice was done. After the trial, they took Holtzclaw's info off the Oklahoma Department of Corrections website and kept his location hush-hush for safety. Now, he's doing time under a fake name in some secret Oklahoma State prison. Daniel Howard. Justice has finally been served for Kendi Howard, a loving mother and wife who was brutally murdered by her own husband, Daniel Howard, a former Idaho State Police trooper. After a long and painful journey, Daniel was held accountable for his heinous crimes and convicted of second-degree murder and domestic battery. Kendi's loved ones filled the courtroom, as did some supporters of Howard, but it was clear who the real victims were. When Kendi's daughter, Brooke Wilkins, confronted Daniel, she made it clear that he would never truly grasp the extent of the harm he had caused to their family. She casually remarked that he just didn't grasp the extent of the damage he had caused them. She expressed that he was where he belonged today, and honestly didn't deserve another shot at freedom. Brooke then proceeded to describe how Daniel treated them harshly after Kendi's murder, such as selling Kendi's belongings at a yard sale on her birthday. Prosecutors revealed that Daniel murdered Kendi because she was planning to leave him for another man, and he didn't want to split their $2 million assets in a divorce. 3 days before her death, Kendi reportedly woke up to Daniel standing over her, dressed in black, and she fled to her parents' house, afraid for her life. But Daniel lured her back home with promises of love and safety, and then subjected her to a violent struggle, leaving her with bruises, cuts, and a broken jaw. Daniel eventually killed Kendi using a carotid restraint technique he learned in police training. He then staged the scene to make it appear as though she died by suicide. But investigators saw through his deceit, and he was convicted of second-degree murder and domestic battery. Before receiving his sentence, Daniel professed his innocence, claiming he loves and misses his wife and still loves Kendi's family. But Judge Barech was unmoved, calling Daniel's actions heinous and outrageous. Judge Barech conveyed that Daniel had ended the life of someone who had brought vitality and brightness to those in her vicinity. Judge Barech also noted that Daniel's history also shows little possibility of rehabilitation. Society must be protected from him, and Kendi's family deserves the closure of a life sentence without parole. Judge Barech sentenced Daniel Howard to life in prison without parole, calling him a remorseless killer. The judge also handed down a 10-year sentence for domestic battery, which will run concurrently with the life sentence. Unfortunately, Daniel also makes the list of one of the corrupt police officers caught and jailed for a lifetime. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Maya Ramos is a tough cop from New Jersey. This lady poured her heart and soul into keeping her community safe for more than a decade. You could say she was like the guardian angel of the neighborhood, known for her no-nonsense attitude and unwavering dedication to the job. But here's the twist. Maya had her fair share of demons lurking behind that badge. Life wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for Maya. She battled some personal stuff that started seeping into her work life. Maya was speeding down the road, possibly a bit too fast, and after having a few drinks, she was involved in a collision with another vehicle, and soon after, she was pulled over by law enforcement. Instead of taking responsibility for her actions, Maya presented her police badge, seemingly attempting to use her professional credentials to evade accountability. However, this tactic ultimately led to disaster. Long story short, Maya got the boot from the force, which is a pretty rare deal for a female cop. But here's the kicker. She dodged criminal charges. This whole saga raised eyebrows about police accountability and the ugly side of power. It's like they say, with great power comes great responsibility. And when that power gets abused, well, things can get messy real quick. This story, alongside the narrative of corrupt police officers caught and jailed for a lifetime, leads us straight into the next case, another cop who shattered the public's trust and abused their authority. Zachary Wester. Meet Zachary Wester, a former Florida sheriff's deputy who thought he was above the law. He was recently sentenced to 12 years in prison for planting drugs in drivers' cars during traffic stops and then arresting them. Wester was convicted in May 2021 on 19 counts, including racketeering, official misconduct, and possession of controlled substances. He didn't speak at the hearing, but his actions spoke volumes. Internal Affairs investigators found the drugs hidden in his patrol car in 2018, and body camera video showed him planting evidence before searching cars. He thought he was sneaky, but he got caught. Prosecutors had to drop charges in nearly 120 cases involving Wester because of his shady actions. He ruined lives and reputations, including that of Teresa Odom, one of his victims. She was stopped for a defective brake light and ended up with a false drug charge that cost her time with her grandchild. Wester's wife and supporters begged for leniency, saying he was a good church-going man who volunteers in his community. But, as prosecutor Tom Williams said, with great power comes great responsibility. Wester abused his power and violated the public's trust. Judge James Goodman sentenced Wester to 12 years, stating that he had committed a serious violation of the public's trust. He emphasized that Wester's actions were a betrayal of the people he was sworn to protect. David Carrick. In a shocking exposé of power and abuse, the case of David Carrick, a former United Kingdom police officer turned serial rapist, reveals the dark underbelly of corruption and the bravery of his victims who brought him to justice. Carrick's reign of terror began when he joined the Metropolitan Police in 2001, and he even rose through the ranks to become an armed officer in the prestigious Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Branch from 2009 until his downfall in 2021. It's chilling to think that he was able to use his position of power and trust to prey on his victims for so long. However, behind his badge and uniform, Carrick was a monster who preyed on multiple women he met on dating sites like Badoo and Tinder between 2003 and 2020. He used his position of power to gain their trust and manipulate them into abusive relationships. His victims suffered physical and emotional torment, including physical abuse with a belt, imprisonment, and degrading acts like being urinated on. He even controlled their every move, dictating what they wore, ate, and when they slept. Some were even banned from eating altogether. In October 2021, a brave woman came forward to report that Carrick had date raped her a year earlier, just a day after another Met officer, Wayne Couzens, was sentenced for the rape and murder of Sarah Everard. In the early hours of October 2, 2021, at 5:18 a.m., Carrick's residence in Hertfordshire witnessed an unexpected event: his arrest, meticulously recorded by a body-worn camera. Concurrently, Carrick's case fell under the scrutiny of an independent public inquiry spearheaded by Lady Elish Angelini. A team of 40 dedicated officers and staff worked tirelessly on Carrick's case, signing disclaimers to prevent leaks to the press. And yet, Carrick initially pleaded not guilty to all charges against him. It wasn't until May 2022, when he was held on remand at HM Prison Belmarsh, that he began to face the gravity of his actions. In December 2022, at the Old Bailey Criminal Court, Carrick pleaded guilty to 49 charges, including 24 counts of rape, relating to 12 female victims. And in January 2023, he pleaded guilty to 4 more counts of rape at Southwark Crown Court. The sheer scale of his crimes left even seasoned professionals like Crown Prosecution Service Chief Prosecutor Jaswant Narwal, who described it as unlike anything he had encountered over 3 decades with the Crown Prosecution Service. The Metropolitan Police were quick to respond, re-examining past claims of domestic abuse or sexual offenses against Met officers and staff. They are currently investigating around 1,000 of their 45,000 employees. Finally, on February 6, 2023, Carrick's sentencing hearing began at Southwark Crown Court. And on February 7, 2023, he received 36 life sentences with a minimum term of 30 years plus 239 days. That means he'll have to serve at least 30 years in prison before becoming eligible for parole. Mark your calendars for May 2, 2052. That's when he will become eligible for parole. Wayne Jenkins. A TV series titled We Own This City is based on the shocking true story of Sergeant Wayne Jenkins and his elite police unit, the Gun Trace Task Force. Jenkins led this Baltimore Police Task Unit, which was intended to remove illegal weapons from the streets and make the community safer. However, instead of fulfilling their mission, they became one of the most corrupt police units in history. Their main purpose was to take illegal weapons off the streets, but they did the opposite. They stole weapons from innocent people and sold them to criminals, robbed drug dealers, and even planted false evidence to cover their tracks. They abused their power and put the community in harm's way. In 2018, Sergeant Wayne Jenkins was arrested and pleaded guilty to robbery, racketeering, and civil rights violations, including planting illegal substances on 2 men in 2010. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison but tried to appeal for a lighter sentence. However, the judge denied his request, calling him a narcotic stealer with a police badge, who put poison into the community he should have been protecting. In court, Jenkins cried and apologized for his actions, admitting he had committed crimes over 7 years. He also apologized to the family of Albert Davis, who lost his life in a car chase started by Jenkins. Jenkins had planted legal substances in Davis's car and didn't face consequences for starting the police chase. The Assistant United States Attorney described Jenkins's unit as operating like a gang, often targeting other gangs because they knew those gangs couldn't seek help from the police. Jenkins' actions and leadership led to a complete betrayal of trust and a failure of justice. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.